Hi, my name is Ed Michaels, and I'd like to share some ear training techniques with you. One of the best ways to work on ear training is to hear the harmonies, and the piano is extremely useful for that, especially for wind players. We're playing a single line of music, so you really want to hear the harmony. So I'll show you some things that are very simple and will make a big difference in your ear training and your ear work. Okay, so if you know nothing about the piano, you see that it's very symmetrical and there's a very definite pattern. You have 2 black keys and 3 black keys, all the way up and all the way down. So look for the brand of the piano. Okay, in this case it's a Yamaha. And I found 2 black keys right in the middle. So if I go to the left of those 2 black keys, I have middle C. Very simple. And you know in the key of C everything is natural, so I'll only be dealing with the white keys. Alright, so this is very simple. You just take every other key, and I'm sustaining the sound so I can get that in my ear. Okay, that's important. That's the important part. You can't do that on a wind instrument. Okay, so that's a major triad. If I go to the second step, again, all white keys, I'm starting on D, and now I have a minor triad. The third step, once again, that's a minor triad. So the fourth step, I started on F, and this time I have a major triad. The fifth step is also a major triad. The sixth step, right, that's minor again. And the seventh step is diminished. Okay, so I played them as an arpeggio, but I sustained the sound. Now, the next step would be to play them in a block chord. So you're hearing the sound all at once. And so on. The next step is to add the seventh. Now that's the sound that we hear in jazz. Okay, so again, I'm using a block chord. That's a major 7th, C major 7. Okay, now I have a D minor 7th. Okay, that's another minor 7th chord. On the fourth step, we have a major 7th. Okay, now that's a different sound. That's the fifth step, and that's a dominant 7th. That's G dominant. That happens every time you're on the fifth step of a major scale. Okay, that's the sixth step, and once again we have a minor 7th. That one's different also. That's called half diminished, or minor 7 flat 5, and that occurred on B, so that would be a B minor 7 flat 5, or sometimes you might see a circle with a slash on it. That's the same chord. It's a minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished. And then we're back home. Okay. So again, you want to do it slowly so you can absorb and really internalize the sound of those chords. Then you can do it faster. And so on. When you get comfortable with that, well, there's 2 things you should do. Do it in every key. So go around the circle of fourths. I like to go from C to F to B flat to E flat, A flat, etc. And again, that may be a little, maybe a bit of a tall order if you're a beginner with this, but just take the easier scales to start. So you could go to F, and you could go to G, B flat, and D. So you're just touching on 1 flat, 1 sharp, 2 flats, 2 sharps, etc. until you build your confidence to go around the circle. That's a fabulous ear training technique. Okay. Now again, we don't hear the block chords when we play jazz. What you hear is a different voicing, and I'll show you how that works. So again, going back to C. Okay, I played. I'm going to number the steps of the scale. So I played 1, 3, 5, 7. that translates to C, E, G, B. All right, I'm going to use what is called a shell voicing. I'll play the C and the B in my left hand, okay? I'm going to take the E and the G, that's 3/5, and I'm going to put that in my right hand. So listen to the sound of this. That's what you hear, that's closer to what you hear from the rhythm section, the pianos. Okay, it's a spread voicing. It's called 1-7-3-5. I'm going to start an octave lower so I don't go up too high. I'll harmonize the C major scale. Again, it's all white keys, not difficult. Okay, and again, internalize the sound. That's the minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7. There's that dominant sound, okay? Okay, and the way that's written, it would be G with the 7. You've seen that many times in jazz music, jazz band music from school, I'm sure. That's the sound of the dominant, very important. Okay, and there's our minor 7 again, A minor 7. Okay, and there's our half diminished B minor 7 flat 5. And then we're back home. The other thing you can do, go back down. I'm going to just touch on harmonizing a minor scale. Again, it's not difficult, it's got a completely different sound to it, so let me touch on that. The sister key, I call it the sister because they share the same key signature when you're dealing with C major and A minor. Okay, it's always the 6th step of the major scale. So if you're looking at C major, the relative minor would be A, and I call that the sister. Okay, so now it's got that raised 7th, so that completely changes the sound. Okay, so there we have the minor 7 flat 5. That's the diminished, half diminished sound, half diminished. Listen to this one. That's the 3rd step. And that's a major 7 with an augmented 5th. Very beautiful. And then the 4th step, we have a minor 7th, D minor 7. There's our 5th step, and that's going to be a dominant 7. Okay, so the 6th step is major. And then listen to this 7th step. That's a full diminished. Diminished 7th, G sharp diminished 7. And then we're back home to A minor major 7. Okay. So one other thing that I'd like to stress with the piano, again, you can hear the harmonies. It's just such a valuable experience. Sitting next to the piano and listening to these sounds. But I would encourage you to work with intervals. And again, you can see visually what the intervals are. So again, going back to the C major scale, every time you go to a white key, you're dealing with a major interval, except when you come to the 4th and the 5th. I'll come back to that in just one second. So C to D, and play it back. Again, I'm doing this rather quickly, so take your time. You can just go up. I would encourage you just to go up and do the ascending interval, and then take your time and do the descending interval. But for time's sake, I'll just do them both. So it's a major 2nd. Okay, I'm going to stay on C, and I'm going to go to E. Okay, that's the sound of a major 3rd. And the other thing, I recall doing this in the ear training classes in college, you could make up little tunes, or you could use tunes to help you discern what those intervals are. You know, like, that's the major 2nd. So you really get the sound of the interval in your ear by relating it to a song. that's the sound of the major third. Now the perfect fourth, okay, that's from C to F. F to C would also be in the same scale, so that's called perfect. That's a perfect interval. And the same thing with G, C to G. That's the sound of a perfect fifth. C is in the scale of G, and G is in the scale of C. So that's the only time that happens, except for the octave. Okay, the octave, of course, is in the same scale. Okay, so here's the sound of the major sixth. And then the sound of the major seventh. Okay, and then the octave. So when you have the black keys, and you're using C as the root, then you would have minor intervals. So C to D flat, okay, that's a minor second. Okay, there's the sound of a minor third. Now that sound is called diminished because we're dealing with perfect intervals. So if you raise the F, it would be an augmented fourth. And if you lower the G, that would be a diminished fifth. So beautiful sound again. Always reminds me of Maria. From West Side Story. Okay? And then you have the minor sixth. Okay? And then the minor seventh. All right. Have fun with that. Hi, my name's Ed Michaels, and I teach part-time here at Lakeland. I direct Jazz Impact and the Civic Jazz Orchestra, and I'm also co-director of the Lakeland Jazz Festival, celebrating its 49th year this year. So what I'd like to do is show you some exercises that I do, and I have my students do, to internalize the technique, some of the techniques that will be useful in learning jazz. So everyone learns major scales, and I encourage you to learn that in every key. But rather than just going to the octave, I'm going to show you how I practice it. I go up to the ninth. Now, I'm using numbers when I equate the scale steps. So an octave would be 8 notes, so that would be my C to C, and then the ninth would just be one step higher, so I'm going to go up to D. Okay, and then I'm going to outline the chord using every other note, so that would be C, E, G, B, and then D. Now I'm going to combine that. So I use what I call a dovetail technique. When I land on the C, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to go from the scale right into the chord. So again, I'll do the major scale up to the ninth, back down. When I hit my low C, I'm going to use the chord outline up to the ninth. Okay, then I would go around the circle. And you can go into the lower register, or you can go into the higher register. Practice it differently, you know, when you get comfortable. For example, I could play the low register on E flat. Or I could do the high. So that gives me a chance to do some extra work on the palm keys. Whatever your instrument, stay in the comfort zone on your range, and then don't be afraid to go outside your comfort zone. That's how you learn. Also, another thing you could do with that exercise is practice the articulations. Now in jazz, I was playing the straight when I first demonstrated. I'm going to use the swing eighth note, and what you want to do is tongue the upbeat and slur into the downbeat. So I'll demonstrate that slowly so you can hear. I'll go back to C. This is my C, B flat concert. Okay, so now I'm going to go a little faster. So I want to go to the second step of the major scale, and that's going to be my D, okay? Second step of C major is D. And listen to the sound of this. I'm going to go up to the ninth again. So D to D would be an octave, one step higher would be E. So that's called the Dorian mode. And the abbreviation for that in jazz would be D with a small m and a 7. D, small, lowercase m, and 7. That's a minor 7th chord. Okay, so listen to the sound of the chord. I'm going to take every other note. D, F, A, C, E. It's easier to start in the key of C because you don't have to deal with any sharps or flats. So here's our sound. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing I did with C major. I'm going to dovetail when I get to the D at the end of the scale. I'm going to go right into the chord. Okay, and again, you want to practice that around the circle. I think it's easiest just to think of your starting note as the second step of the major scale. So again, you really want to know your major scales. And again, if you don't know the entire circle, don't think that you have to do every scale all at once. You can start with a few flats. To start with F major, B flat major. For saxophone players, the sharp keys are a little easier because we tend to play in sharps more. So G would be great, D, A. See if you can get up to 3 sharps and 3 flats. Okay. So let me just demonstrate a little bit going around the circle. Okay, so I'll start again with D minor 7. So this is related to the C major scale. Now I start on G, which is related to the F major scale. C is related to B flat. Okay, and so on. I'm going to go to the 5th step now. Okay, all the notes of the scale are important, and these are called modes. So, I would encourage you to practice each step of the scale. But again, I'm zeroing in on the 1st, the 2nd, and the 5th, and there's a reason for that. A very common progression in jazz is called 2-5-1. You've probably heard that term, 2-5-1. And what it is, it uses the Dorian, or the 2nd step of the scale, then the 5th step of the scale, and then the 1st step. So it's a very valuable tool and a very valuable resource and something to practice. So let's jump to the 5th step of C major, and that's going to be my G. I'm starting on G. And again, I'm going to go up to the 9th. So I'll be going up to an A. Okay, now taking every other note, I have G, B, D, F, A. so once again, when I combine that, I have this sound. And again, I could bounce that. Okay, so again, it's valuable to go around the circle. Okay, so I'll start on G. So again, now G is related to C. C is related to F. Okay, and now I'm on F, which is related to B flat. Okay, and so on through the rest of the circle. So I mentioned the modes. I'll tell you a fun way to remember that. This was told to me by Greg Fishman. He's a famous saxophonist in Chicago, and I've taken some lessons with him, and I recommend his books very highly to learn more about jazz and jazz theory. But if you think of the modes, you think of this sentence: I don't play lay music at lunch. So that gives you Ionian, don't, that's Dorian, play, that's called Phrygian, lame, Lydian, M, that's the fifth step, Mixolydian, at, that's Aeolian, lunch, that's Locrian. So it's a fun way to remember the modes. And again, so what you could do is this. I'm doing there, I'm starting on each mode. I'm doing that rather quickly. That's for a more advanced student, but it's very valuable to hear all the modes, and again, hear the colors. Stan Getz said something was very important. He was asked once about how he feels about modes, and he says, well, it's not the mode, it's the mood. And I thought that was really such a profound statement. So, don't just learn the modes to say, well, I can play all the modes, but listen to the mood and listen to the quality of the sound, because it changes with every mode. Okay, so let's get back to the second step, the second mode, that's the Dorian, the fifth, which is the Mixolydian, and then one, which is it's called Ionian. So that's called 2-5-1. You've heard that sound. Now, I started on the root, okay? I'm going to use more of a connection. This is called voice leading. So I'm going to go up the D minor chord. Okay, now, a tone that would be very close to that would be either C or D. I'm going to choose, B or D from the G Mixolydian chord, okay? So that would be G, B, D, F. Okay, so I'm going to choose the B. So that was very close by, that was a half step away. And then I'm going to come down the G major, or the G dominant chord. And that leads me into the third of C major. I'm right next to E now. So instead of having that choppy sound, by doing the voice leading, I went from one chord into the next very smoothly. Okay, and you can make up your own voice leading, but that's an easy way to start, okay, with the 2-5-1, okay? And again, trying to use the closest notes, okay, going from one chord to another. I want to show you a little bit about triads. Again, this is something very important to master. So again, we'll take the simple triads. There's only 4 triads. Okay, so the first one is major. I'll stay in C. And again, use different rhythms. A rhythm is energy. So once you get your footing and you feel you have a foundation in the chord and the scale, start putting in syncopation. Okay, make up some rhythms. So that was C major. If I flat the third, I have C minor. And I'm going to flat the fifth. That's going to give me a diminished sound. Okay, let's go back to the major triad, C, E, G. I'm going to raise the fifth this time, and that's called augmented. Listen to the sound of this. So again, that's a valuable exercise to do around the circle. I'll demonstrate. I'll just use the major. Okay, so I went around the circle completely. Do that with the major, the minor, diminished, and augmented. Have fun with that. Hi, my name is Ed Michaels, and in part 3 of this series I'm going to take the tune Broadway Street by Greg Fishman, and I'm going to show you how I like to practice when I'm working with a soundtrack. So what I really encourage you to do is listen to other artists. Listen to artists on your particular instrument. I would encourage you to listen to the Count Basie Orchestra. They use a lot of riffs and a lot of blues patterns that you can pick up. And also B.B. King is a great artist that would be fun to listen to. Okay, so in this case I'm going to be emulating what Greg Fishman does. And again, the tune is called Broadway Street. We're going to use this as the tune for the Lakeland Jazz Festival. So those of you that are interested in submitting a recording, this will give you an idea of how to approach that. Several ideas, okay? Creativity counts, so you're welcome to create as you go along. But again, this will give you some foundation and some ideas that you can use, hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to cue up Greg. What I'm going to try to do, I'm going to use the flute so you can hear Greg and you can hear me. And I'm going to try to really match his articulations. He slurs into the downbeat. Okay? And, and all the accents and inflections are important. Okay, so you heard me matching what Greg Fishman was playing on Broadway Street. And one thing I wanted to mention, that the tempo is a little brisk, so you should always practice with the metronome. I can't stress that enough. The metronome is so very important. Make that your friend. But another little device you can use is called the Amazing Slow Downer. And you can get that app on your phone. It's about $13 or $14, so it's not terribly expensive. And you could take music from your music library and then slow the tempo down. So I highly recommend that. If you buy it on software and put it on your computer, it's a little more expensive. But again, it's really a very valuable device in my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to just go back to the solo. I'm going to play it on saxophone this time. So let's say, for example, I'm just starting out. What I recommend would be maybe using a riff. Okay, so I'm going to take the blues scale. I'm in B-flat concert. Okay, so I'm going to be playing the C blues scale. So the target notes in the blues scale is the flat third, the flat fifth, and the flat seventh. So the notes I'm playing would be C, E flat, F, G flat, which is F sharp, but I like to think of that as a flat fifth, so that's G flat. And then G, the flat seventh is B flat, and then I come home to C. You see, it's ready for little licks. Those are called licks. Different ideas, you know. So again, express your creativity. Don't just practice the scale. Start adding some things to it. There's a little riff that Sonny Rollins wrote using that blues scale, and it's called Sunny Moon for Two. So I'm going to just use that. It's the blues scale descending. He uses all the notes except for the flat fifth. So there's no G flat in this. Then he goes one step lower, that's the flat seventh, and he comes back home to C. And there's a little syncopation. I'll play the rhythm to it. That's basically the tune, and then he ends the phrase by going. That was the C, E flat, F, back to E flat, and then C. So again, it just kind of spins itself into a melody. So that's the entire phrase. It's a 4-bar phrase. I'll play the whole thing for you to hear. So that's 4 bars. Now in a 12-bar blues form, you would play it 2 more times, and you have the blues, 12-bar blues. I'll do it straight the first 4 bars, and I'm going to add a little bit. One of the techniques that you can use is neighboring tones. So I might go to an upper neighbor or a lower neighbor to embellish the melody. Also, passing tones are very good. Passing tones are just simply a scale step, or chromatic or diatonic. Diatonic means it's within the key. So I'll play around with that a little bit. The other thing I'm going to use, I might use some displacement. Displacement is a fancy word for starting on different parts of the beat. For example, I'll do a simple displacement with that riff I just played. The tune actually starts on the end of 1, 2, 3, 4. Because I'm going to displace that first beat, I'm going to start right on 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just changed the rhythm slightly. That's called displacement. So you could use a lot of displacement, and I'll demonstrate a little bit of that. I'll keep it simple so you can hear. So first time, the first 4 bars are the melody. adding on and subtracting. And a little more. So again, I stay within the blues scale using neighboring tones and some altering the rhythms, okay? So again, experiment with that. Have fun doing that. I'm going to go back to Greg's blues, okay? And again, I'm going to simplify this. So I'm going to play the head of the tune, but just the first 12 bars. Okay, so there I have the first 12 bars, and you can use that as your head for the recording that you're doing for the Lakeland Jazz Festival. Or you could use the riff that I just did, Sunny Moon for Two. There's 1,000 riffs that you can use. Again, I mentioned listening to the Count Basie band. Basie loves to use riffs in his recordings. So come up with a riff that you've heard, or you can make up your own riff and create your own tune within the blues form, okay? So I'm going to go back to Greg's melody, and I'm going to play around with that a little bit. I call that crossing lanes, okay? So I did a little bit of my ideas, and then I used some of Greg's ideas. You're hearing me coming back to some of his ideas and his licks. So again, I call that changing lanes, because I did a little bit of me, a little bit of Greg. And again, that's something valuable too. If you transcribe a solo, you won't be playing that solo verbatim. You won't play every note when you're on stage. So it's good to start adding some of your own ideas. What is your melodic idea? What is your sense of melody? Experiment with that. Okay, so what I'm going to do next then, I'm going to try and show you a little segment here of how you could put your recording together for the Lakeland Jazz Festival. And again, just in general practicing, okay? And again, the tempo is a little fast. Use the amazing slow down, or there's some other apps that you can use the B-flat blues, okay? So here we are. This is Greg Fishman's backing track. What I did was I played the melody the first time. The second and third time I developed the solo. So the first time I tried to keep it a little simpler, and then the second time I was adding more notes, and then I came back to the melody again. So that would be head, solo 1, first chorus, second chorus. It was a little more active, a little more engaged, and then came back again to the melody. I'll do one more. This time, well, I'll use the second half of the tune, okay? So, again, it's 12 bars. I'll use that as my main theme, and then I'm going to play some things off of that. I call the different choruses gears. I think of it in terms of gears. So the first gear would be maybe a little more simple. Maybe I was using a lot of the blues scale the first time through on the last demonstration. So I'll try to use a little bit more with intervals. And then the second time, I'll use more patterns. Patterns are another great thing to do. So like a simple pattern would be thirds. Everybody knows thirds. Okay, so you could do a pattern of thirds. The lower neighbors, upper neighbors, passing tones. Here's one of my favorite patterns. It's a lower neighbor and then a third. Listen. And then the next step. Okay, so different combinations like that are cool. And then the third, when I do the third chorus, I'm going to add a little more intensity and maybe a little more upper register, okay? Maybe a little louder volume, and then I'll come back again to the melody. So again, the form on this will be the head, or the main melody, and then first gear, second gear, third gear, and then I'll come back into the melody. So this will be a little more advanced. And again, if you're a beginner, just do one chorus. So I'm hoping everyone will submit a recording for the Lakeland Jazz Festival. It's going to be fun, okay? So that's what it's meant to be. All right, here we go. And the backing track will go for 8 choruses, so you can have a lot of fun with that. But again, simplify. You don't have to do 8 choruses right out of the gate. Just experiment and have fun with that. Again, I'm hoping everybody will submit something to the Lakeland Jazz Festival. Stay well. Hope to see you soon.